I haven't done a personally focused video for some time, and it's a little bit overdue, I think. And something that a student asked me about provides me with a good occasion for this. I would say that it's now becoming a pattern. About once a year, I have a student who comes to me with some sort of problem or a question and would like some advice about it, something personal. And I see, sort of the larger picture, and then I shoot a video on it. Last year, it was a student who had a friend who was very troubled by his adoption and the circumstances surrounding it, and I shot a video about being adopted. And this video here, I mean, you can see the title, it's about love and infatuation. And I had a student who wrote on his final exam a sort of addendum to it, and he said, I've got a question about love and infatuation that's been bothering me. And I'll read the whole question in a moment. What I'm going to do in this video is address the issues, the questions, the topics that he's got rolled into this paragraph, because they're very interesting. Talk a little bit about my own experience, and hopefully stay fairly on point. And I'll also talk a little bit about some of the bigger picture issues with love and infatuation, and maybe even give a little bit of advice. I don't have a ton of advice to give, but I think there's some things I can say. So before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of framing of how this came up. So this semester, this is the final exam for the Intro to Philosophy class that I taught this semester. And the intro class, I switch it up every semester, give it a different theme. This time around, I picked the theme Love, Friendship, and Desire. So we read Plato's Symposium, and we read Cicero's On Friendship, and we read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, book 8 and 9. And we read some Thomas Aquinas, and we read some Descartes, and we read the love letters between Abelard and Eloise. And so it was a very fruitful class. I don't know that they actually learned quite as much about metaphysics and epistemology as they ought to, but they learned a lot about ethics and about human nature and about how the emotions work. And I think this is very useful to do. There's a lot of wisdom contained in these discussions and speculations about love and friendship and desire and infatuation and relationships and how we ought to treat each other and how to structure our lives in ancient and medieval and early modern thought. That's why I teach this stuff. So this is a young man who has been thinking about these things quite a bit. He made some really great contributions in class and in writing, so I know that he's been thinking about these things. My wife pointed something out as well, and this is also kind of the framing thing, that it's in certain ways kind of a sign of respect to have a student ask you about these sort of issues. And at first I was like, "Whoa, really?" And she's like, "Yeah, I mean, that means that they actually, first off, they think that you might know something about this that they don't know. And that by itself, is a big step, because adolescents and young adults usually think that they know a hell of a lot more than they do. That's how they get into trouble. And they tend to be, and I know this from my own experience of having been one, they tend to be a bit dismissive of what settled adults have to say. They think that every generation seems to think that it's facing unique, new struggles, that love is somehow different for it than it is for those old people there. And back in their day, everything was so much simpler. And if you read literature and you read history, you find out that was never the case. Love was always complicated. We have sort of images of a past where that was the case, and some people were maybe able to live lives where that seemed to be the case, but that wasn't a universal thing across the board. So it's actually a sign of wisdom to ask older people who you think are somewhat on the ball to give you some guidance or advice or some insight about these sort of things. And I think she's right. I'm not sure what it is in my manner that makes me seem personable or receptive, but apparently this student thought that I was somebody who he's willing to trust with some fairly, not detailed, but some fairly personal revelations. So let me read what he actually has to say. This is pretty interesting stuff. So he says, I've recently been in contact with a girl I used to be infatuated with when I was 18. I no longer feel infatuated with girls. However, because I haven't been in contact, I feel as though the infatuation feelings have come back. So this is a guy who actually has it quite together, who isn't just sort of like flitting from girl to girl to girl, from object of affection to the next one to the next one. He's looking for something bigger and better, but there's this girl from his past that he's now feeling these emotions towards again. So he goes on. Infatuation is scary because you see the other person through rose-colored glasses, even though that person isn't perfect. My question is, what is the best way to deal with infatuation, because it isn't love and always seems to not work out? And also, can infatuation ever turn to love? So this is actually great stuff. I mean, this is the sort of perennial matters that younger people and even older people in every generation throughout time have to deal with. We haven't always called it infatuation. In earlier times, they called this, eros or desire or libido or concupiscence, or there's all sorts of names for it. But it's the same basic thing. And infatuation it's within the spectrum of love. Oftentimes we associate infatuation with just sexual desire, but it's not just or even primarily about sex. It's about a sort of romantic attitude towards the other, towards seeing them, like he says, with rose-colored glasses, seeing everything that's really good about them, perhaps projecting some of that there, or reading things in that aren't there, and feeling this sense of attraction, of wanting to be in their presence, of wanting to think about them, even of not being able to not think about them. And to a certain extent, even feeling a sense of awe or wonder or curiosity in their presence. And it makes us very vulnerable to the other person as well. We care about what they think, how they perceive our appearance, whether they smile at us, whether they frown, whether they give us the time of day or don't. All these things can take on great significance. And so I think he's really smart for saying, hey, infatuation can be a lot of trouble. So he's really saying three different things about infatuation here, and I think we should look at each one of these in turn. He says infatuation leads us to look at the other person through rose-colored glasses, even though that person isn't perfect. He wants to know what's the best way to deal with infatuation because it's not love. And he says it always seems to not work out. So we got three different interesting issues there, and then two questions. So let's look at these issues in turn. Does infatuation make us look at the other person with the proverbial rose-colored glasses? Yeah, it tends to make us overlook their flaws. If you think about, this is just an example, what happened when we went to HD TV and how people were complaining that the newscasters, now you can see like all the pores of their skin and all their wrinkles. HD TV was giving us a more accurate representation of how people really look, and people were looking at it and they're like, I don't think I want to watch that. It's kind of creeping me out. And infatuation, think of infatuation as being like the ultimate foundation makeup. It covers over all the blemishes and all the cracks and crevices, and that's what it does. It surrounds the person with kind of an aura. Now that's kind of good in some ways, because nobody is perfect, and let's just think about physical appearance. You can pick the most attractive person who you think is attractive, and then change the light, and they're not going to be quite as attractive. You're going to find some flaw to them. Or, there's things over time where you're like, man, I love that quality about that person. And then after a while, you're like, they're driving me nuts because of that. I thought that was really great. This is one of those things that happens when opposites attract, right? You're like, oh, man, I love that person because she's so outgoing and I'm kind of shy. And then after a while, you're like, man, she's always dragging me into stuff that I don't want to be involved with. So, it's kind of good to have some things paved over and to look at them optimistically through the rose-colored glasses. But there's danger signs that you also want to watch out for as well. If somebody is prone to cheating on you or to stealing your stuff or to playing fast and loose with your privacy, or, you could think of all sorts, or is insanely jealous, infatuation can blind you to those. And that's not good. And then infatuation can play into this whole dynamic where they screw you over or they do something that's, stupid or thoughtless, and, you're bothered by it, but then you say, well, I really like them, and you feel a little bit ashamed of being taken advantage of, and then you look at it more optimistically, and then you're just setting yourself up to get treated badly again. So, yeah, infatuation can be dangerous in that respect, and can lead us to have bad judgment about the people who we're involved with. If it's just a matter of having coffee with the person and hanging out with them, probably not that big a deal. If it's hooking up with them and then moving in with them, that could actually be life-changing consequences depending on what they're like. And it's good to bear this in mind. When you get involved with somebody, you're not just vulnerable to them physically, you're vulnerable to them emotionally, in terms of your goals and plans, in terms of your finances, in terms of your circle of friends. So there's all sorts of other goods that come up for that. So that's the rose-colored glasses issue. Let's think about infatuation and love. Is infatuation fundamentally different from love? It really depends on what you mean by love. And infatuation is a narrower term. Like I said, we have a lot of other terms that we could translate as infatuation. But love is a very broad term. And love can mean a lot of different things. If you want to see some examples of this, watch those videos from my intro class and see how many different models of love we talked about, where friendship is a kind of love. And friendship can be of all different sorts. It can be about the person themselves and this intimate connection. It could be about pleasure. It could be about usefulness. We have the kind of love that parents and children have for each other. The country can be an object of love. The divine can be an object of love. Animals can be an object of love. There's all sorts of modalities to love. So when you say, I want to be careful about infatuation because it isn't love, I think what's really being said there is something more like this. I need to be careful about infatuation because infatuation can crowd out or cut off the possibility of, or even masquerade as these other kinds of love that are in the long run perhaps more valuable. But you don't want to totally leave infatuation out. If you think about a marriage, for example, a marriage shouldn't just be this sort of self-giving love that Christians call agape, and it shouldn't just be a friendship. It should include the erotic dimension of desire for each other, of attraction to each other as well. That's what makes it complete. But you wouldn't just, this is where a lot of people go wrong. They hook up and they're like, yeah, let's make a marriage out of this. That's not going to be enough because there's this other stuff over here. And the question is, how much are these going to interfere with each other? That's a judgment question that you can't settle across the board for every single relationship. You have to look at the relationship. You have to look at the person. And this goes to that question, can infatuation turn into love? Can infatuation lead to these other kinds of love, like, say, a deep, abiding friendship? Yes, it can. But that doesn't mean that it automatically will. So that's the second thing. Now let's think about the third one. Infatuation always seems to not work out. Well, why is that the case? A couple different explanations we could give for that. One would be that infatuation, by its very nature, is kind of ephemeral, kind of short-lived. If it's really about, you think about this, if it's really about sexual desire, once you have sex, then, you're satisfied and that's it. You might want to have sex some more, but, and you might be sort of happier now that you've actually had it. But, that's about as high as it goes. And, Plato has some of his characters talk about that in the Symposium as the bad kind of love. And the same thing could go for other things as well. It's not always, like I said, it's not always about sex. Sometimes we just want to have that person around us and with us. And oftentimes we're very confused about what it is that we really want from the other person who we're attracted to, who we're infatuated with. But so why doesn't it work out? Sometimes it's just because it's short-lived, and we get infatuated with somebody, and like I said, traits that we find endearing at the start, after the infatuation starts to fade, we're like, I can't stand this person and their BS anymore. I got to get the hell out of here. So there's that, and I think that infatuation, if we give too much sway to it, and here I'm actually talking from experience, can crowd out those other, perhaps more valuable types of affection or love, like friendship, like charity or agape, like the sort of thing that develops just with companionship. It can become too much, so to speak. And if you don't have these other things, the relationship is probably not going to be all that viable over time, all that long-lived. Now, if you have these other things, the infatuation could, in fact, develop into other types of love. You could start dating this person, and you become friends with them, and now you go through some common experiences together. You're there with them when their grandpa dies, and you see them graduate and walk across the stage, and you tell them your hopes and dreams, and they tell you their hopes and dreams, and you become close, you become connected with each other. You get to meet their family, they meet your family, and people get along or don't get along. These are the sort of things that relationships are really composed of, and that's possible with a starting point of infatuation. It really depends on what kind of person that we're talking about. And there's no information here that would lead me to be able to give more detailed advice. That's something that each person would have to figure out for themselves, this young man in his own case. But, there's certain things that, like I said, are sort of red flags. And if infatuation isn't blinding you to them, then that can help. So, do I have any useful advice? Here's what I would say. It's really great that this young man actually recognizes the difference between infatuation and other things that we call love, and that it doesn't substitute for them, and that it can be dangerous, and preclude them or occlude them, or however you want to put it, get in the way of them. That's a really good thing to have in your belt. I think it's also good that he recognizes just how strong infatuation can be. This is the problem, what we call in moral philosophy, the problem of acrosia, or self-control. Oftentimes we know what the good is, and we know what the bad is, and we know what we ought to be doing, but we find ourselves kind of pulled over here, and we could resist it if we really, really, really wanted to, if we persevered in our choices. But that's really tough to do, and then we find ourselves, sort of getting drawn into things that we're, even at the time, we're like, man, I shouldn't be doing this, but we do it. And so that's something else to pay attention to. Another thing that I would say is, if you do choose to get involved with this person, do not cut off your friends and family and use them as a sounding board. if you have decent friends and your friends don't like the person who you're going out with, there's probably something that they're attuned to that you're missing out on because you're wearing those rose-colored glasses or you're wearing blinders, right? Like a horse in drawing a carriage. Oftentimes, people who are bad for you will actually want to sideline your friends and family and isolate you from them. When you're involved with another person, you want them to actually be in sort of a harmonious relationship with the rest of your people who matter to you, the people that you love, the people that you care about, and who care about you. And so you want to use them as sounding boards. You want to take advice from, parents, or in this case, from a college professor who you think actually knows something, or your friends. Oftentimes your friends won't be able to put their finger exactly on what's off with somebody, but they'll say, "Yeah, I don't know about this. It seems like there's something off. The jealousy's kind of weird. There's a strange vibe from this person." Provided that your friends are actually decent people, they can be very good sounding boards. So that's another piece of advice that I would give. And I would just, I would keep on thinking about these issues. It couldn't hurt to actually write down some of this stuff. This is the last bit of advice that I'll give to you. I would actually sort of like keep track over time about of your feelings and about what you're tempted to do and how you're feeling about your feelings and what you actually do decide to do. Because that way, if things get dicey or seem off, you've got a kind of paper trail that you can look back at and say, oh, wait a second, I thought something was kind of weird back here. Because a lot of times our memories get kind of jumbled up and when our emotions get involved, if we've got it down on paper, I think sometimes that can be very helpful. You don't even have to put it on paper. You could, create a Google Doc that only you have access to. Don't make it public, and chart it out there. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Also, don't share it with the person if it's about them. So I've really enjoyed thinking about this, and I hope here I'm just sort of addressing my former student, but this can go for my other YouTube viewers if this is of any help to you. I hope that this actually gives you some insight, some framework for thinking about these things. I hope that if you are going to have a relationship with this person, that you're now well equipped to sort of see it through and think about the things that you need to take account of at the right time so that you'll actually be happy. Because a good relationship, I think, and a lot of the philosophers who we studied in this class think this as well, is really integral to the good life. So that's about all the advice that I have.